In the 1980s, a simple living room stereo was the pinnacle of home cinema, powered by amplifiers so overbuilt that today's mass-market systems cannot match their fidelity. Magazines crowned these components the standard for sound. But what did they know that we have lost sight of? The story of why those forgotten machines from the greatest era of home theater still outperform much of what came after is more complicated and more revealing than you might think. Evenings in the early 1980s often centered around a pair of tall speakers flanking a wood-veneered cabinet, the glow of analog dials and meters setting the mood. Across North America and Europe, the living room stereo was more than just a music system, it was the heart of family entertainment. Households arranged their furniture around these two speakers, not a television, expecting music and movies to share the same path to the listener. Movie nights meant dimming the lights and threading a VHS tape or sliding in a laser disc, with audio routed through the same amplifier that played records and radio. For most, the idea of surround sound was still distant. Stereo was the gold standard, and the promise of a wide, immersive soundstage came from careful speaker placement and thoughtful listening. Friends gathered for demo sessions, comparing how a favorite album or blockbuster film sounded on different setups. Magazines and hi-fi salons shaped these rituals, offering advice on speaker toe-in and room acoustics. In this era, the pursuit was fidelity and presence. Two channels, faithfully rendered, defined what home theater meant for a generation. Throughout the 1980s, print magazines stood as the ultimate authorities on what counted as true high-fidelity sound in the home. Titles like Stereo Review and Audio Magazine reached hundreds of thousands of readers every month, and their reviews and lab tests shaped the very definition of quality for a generation of enthusiasts. Julian Hirsch, writing for Stereo Review in 1981, described the Pioneer SX 1980 receiver as redefining dynamic headroom for home use, far beyond what is needed for stereo TV or VCR soundtracks, and yet essential for cinematic scale without compression. Those words, printed and reprinted, set a standard that manufacturers could not ignore. J. Gordon Holt in Audio insisted on conservative ratings, oversized transformers, and capacitor banks to ensure current delivery for dynamic peaks, not inflated RMS claims, because video sources were beginning to challenge audio purity. That emphasis on reliable current delivery and thermal margin became a technical demand as much as a marketing point. Pull quotes like these, combined with detailed measurements and subjective listening notes, created a climate where overbuilt power supplies and low-noise floors became non-negotiable. Measurements mattered, and subjective impressions guided interpretation of those numbers. For many buyers, a product's fate was decided not in the showroom, but in the pages of these magazines. Editors and reviewers became gatekeepers, and their endorsement or criticism echoed through audio salons and dealer showrooms, pushing brands to prioritize sound quality and long-term reliability over flashy features. Engineers in the 1980s designed home audio gear with a singular focus: deliver the cleanest, most lifelike sound possible, even if it meant building amplifiers and receivers that seemed excessive by later standards. Instead of relying on integrated circuits for amplification, designers chose discrete transistors for each stage, allowing precise control over every part of the signal path. This approach demanded larger circuit boards and more individual parts, but it also meant that noise and distortion could be kept to a minimum. Power supplies were deliberately oversized, with heavy transformers and banks of capacitors that stored enough energy to handle sudden bursts of sound, whether a film's explosion or a symphony's crescendo. Controls were tactile and direct. Solid metal knobs, mechanical switches, and analog meters reinforced a sense of connection between listener and system. Each input change or volume adjustment became a physical act, not just a menu selection. The result was a listening experience grounded in simplicity and transparency. Every design choice, from the layout of circuit traces to the feel of the controls, reflected the belief that the shortest, cleanest analog path was the surest route to sonic truth. These priorities set the stage for the hardware icons that would define the era's reputation for audio excellence. Inside the cabinets of 1980s amplifiers and receivers, engineering priorities become clear. Brands like Pioneer, with its SX 1980 and early Elite models, committed to massive linear power supplies, transformers weighing several kilograms, and capacitor banks storing thousands of microfarads per channel. These components were not just for show. They allowed the amplifier to deliver sudden bursts of current, maintaining clarity during explosions or orchestral peaks without sagging or clipping. Real-world power delivery mattered more than optimistic wattage claims. Dual mono layouts, as seen in high-end Luxman and Accuphase models, separated power rails for each channel, reducing crosstalk and ensuring stable performance even under heavy loads. Adcom's GFA 555, designed by Nelson Pass, and Threshold Stasis series pushed this philosophy further, with oversized heat sinks and output stages built to handle difficult speaker loads. Krell's early amplifiers promised to double their output as impedance dropped, a feat enabled by enormous transformers and robust supply rails. Compared to modern AV receivers, which split lighter supplies across many channels, these 1980s designs devoted their resources to just 2 or 3, making them favorites for front channel duties even decades later. The result was not just higher headline power, but a sense of effortlessness, a system that could reproduce film soundtracks with scale and authority, regardless of what the source demanded. Klipsch speakers became a fixture in countless 1980s living rooms, not because of marketing, but because their horn-loaded designs offered a level of efficiency few rivals could match. Models like the Cornwall II and Heresy II delivered sensitivity ratings near 99 decibels and 97 decibels respectively, meaning a modest amplifier could drive them to theater-like levels with only a handful of watts. This efficiency was not just about loudness. It allowed dynamic film soundtracks to leap from the speakers without strain, preserving clarity even during the most explosive scenes. Horn architecture also shaped the way sound filled a room. By focusing energy forward, these speakers produced strong dialogue and impactful effects while minimizing unwanted reflections. Vented cabinets, such as those found in the Cornwall, extended bass response into the 40 Hz range, giving action sequences a physical presence that smaller sealed bookshelf designs struggled to match. Acoustic suspension models from AR and KEF, though less efficient, offered a different strength. They produced tighter, more controlled bass and wide dispersion, favoring musicality and natural timbre. The choice between horn-loaded and sealed speakers reflected a balance, efficiency, and punch versus finesse and subtlety. In both cases, amplifier designs from the 1980s, built for real-world current delivery, found their ideal match in speakers that could translate every watt into lifelike impact. By the middle of the 1980s, the frontiers of home entertainment were being redrawn by the arrival of new source formats that demanded more from every link in the audio chain. VHS Hi-Fi, introduced on higher-end decks, used deep-buried FM audio tracks to deliver a frequency range from 20 to 20,000 Hz and a signal-to-noise ratio above 80 decibels, numbers that rivaled the compact disc. Laserdisc, already the connoisseur's choice for picture quality, set a new bar for audio with analog FM and on later discs, full PCM digital sound. Early compact disc players with their 16-bit, 44.1 kHz digital streams entered living rooms as both music and movie sources. Their robust digital-to-analog converter sections and analog output stages making them credible in any high-fidelity setup. Yet even as these formats raised the bar for stereo playback, the push for greater immersion led to the adoption of Dolby Surround, and by the late 1980s, Dolby Pro logic. These systems used matrix decoding, deriving center and surround channels from ordinary stereo tracks to create a sense of space and stability without sacrificing the core fidelity that defined the era. The result was a hybrid environment. Analog amplifiers and speakers built for music were suddenly tasked with reproducing cinematic soundtracks, and the fidelity of the source became the new bottleneck. Measurement charts from the period confirm that the leap in dynamic range and bandwidth from VHS hi-fi and Laserdisc forced manufacturers and enthusiasts alike to rethink what their systems could and should deliver. Oscilloscopes and sound pressure meters became the arbiters of truth in the 1980s home audio world. Signal-to-noise ratios regularly reached 95 to 105 decibels on line-level inputs, ensuring that the quietest passages in a film remained free from background hiss. Dynamic headroom, the extra power available for sudden peaks, often measured 2 to 3 decibels above the amplifier's rated output, a margin made possible by oversized transformers and capacitor banks storing thousands of microfarads per channel. During real-world tests, supply rails in these amplifiers held steady even as speakers demanded bursts of current for explosions or orchestral climaxes. Rail sag, the voltage drop that plagues underbuilt designs, was nearly absent. This measurable stability translated directly into uncompressed, lifelike dynamics, something that even today's feature-packed receivers can struggle to match under stress. A side-by-side listening test can settle the debate. Cue up a favorite film scene. First, play it through a fully restored receiver from the 1980s, then through the front channels of a modern AVR. Peaks that trigger compression on the newer unit remain effortless on the vintage amp, thanks to oversized transformers and large capacitor banks that still deliver full current decades later. For those building a hybrid system, the wiring is simple. Run the pre-out signals from your AVR or processor straight into the main in jacks of a vintage power amp or receiver. Restoration brings these classics back to life with fresh electrolytic capacitors, cleaned relay contacts, and a bias check to ensure silent backgrounds and stable output. A basic checklist includes recapping, deoxit for switches, and verifying idle current. With these steps, the analog front end stands ready to handle today's sources, combining tactile control with the dynamic headroom that made gear from the 1980s legendary. Today, home audio gear from the 1980s is more than nostalgia. It is proof that sound-first engineering endures. As modern receivers chase features, demand for vintage amplifiers and speakers only grows. The lesson is clear. Clarity and build quality never go out of style. The real upgrade is remembering what matters: